Welcome to the Fireproof Career Podcast, the podcast for the high performers, the high achievers who want to create the career they love, achieve sustainable success, but without the burnout. I am your host, Sabira Jones, aka the Corporate Hippie, and today we are being joined by Petra Velzeboer, forgive me. She is a renowned mental health expert, TEDx speaker, author, and CEO of mental health consultancy PVL. Her passion can be traced back to her unique background, having been raised in a notorious cult and struggling to find her place in the world. A series of life-altering events led her to pursue a career as a psychotherapist so that she could help others. After working in various companies with toxic work environments, she has made it her life's mission to reinvent the world of work and completely shift the current system, ushering in the future of work. I am really excited to talk to Petra. Petra has definitely been there along my own personal journey of entering into this world. And so I'd like to welcome you all to Petra. Hi, Petra.
Thank you, Subira. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, honestly, thanks for being here. So I made mention of it, but Petra, honestly, since my first time speaking to a public audience as a keynote speaker, you were there as a host at that conference that day. I had the pleasure of hosting your book launch of your very first book, Begin With You, which was so exciting. Here it is, here it is. And honestly, it's so great to be able to have conversations with like-minded people because we both share a passion of creating psychologically safe environments for people to excel, to thrive, to be themselves and begin with themselves. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. I actually can't believe that was your first keynote at all. I was like, here, we have got an expert on stage. I was taking notes. I don't do that all the time with people that I watch. And I was like, goodness, like you brought a new spin to the burnout theme, which I really appreciated. So yeah, absolutely a pleasure to have hosted you. And so cool that you then kind of introduced me at my book launch.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so great, as I said, to meet like-minded people and collaborate to really, as you said, it's the future of work. We've had a whole paradigm shift since, the coronavirus, the pandemic, ways of working, this hybrid world. And it's like, how do you bring people to forward? And it's that whole saying of, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. I'm so butchering that quote, but here we are.
Here we are. But also both of us have sort of gone alone a little bit for part of what we do, right? And then slowly bringing along other people with us, I think. And that probably speaks to some of the toxicity we see in workplaces.
Absolutely. But that's not what we want to be about in the Fireproof Career. We really want to focus on how do you not only empower yourself, take back your own personal power to create the career and lives that you want, but how do you create a network of people around you who have done what you want to do? Because I completely look up to you, Petra. I'm like, I didn't know all of these things were possible. Like, this is incredible. So how do we create communities around us where we're both inspired and how we can aspire to be like others and also just see past the four walls around us. So with that being said, Petra, I think I'd like to know, and I'm sure the listeners would like to know, who is Petra? Oftentimes we get caught up with what we do and we use that to describe ourselves, but we don't want to do that. So tell us who you are and a fun fact about you.
Ooh, fun. Well, I am, as many women, as many people, many things. I am a parent, so I've got two young adults now in my household, 19 and 17. That takes a little bit of emotional energy, but also is a lot of fun because they do crack me up every minute of the day. I'm, of course, an entrepreneur. I'm a partner, and I guess my aim or the things that I aspire to be are just really honest. And that I guess if it's like, who am I? I'm a really honest human, and that means both towards myself and to others. And I think we're losing a little bit of honesty in the world today. And so that's, of course, come from, being in a world in many years of my life where I firmly wore a mask and pretended everything was okay, kind of led a double life, all of those things. So radical honesty is something important to me about who I am. Gives you a little flavor.
If there's one thing I can say about you, it's that radical honesty. The saying things as they are in order to create the change that we need. And I love that because so many people are like, oh, don't rock the boat. And I'm like, no, capsize the boat. If you know how to swim, sometimes you've got to capsize the boat in order to really shake things up. And there's one thing you do, Petra, is you keep it radically honest. And I love that.
Yeah. And if it's something for me, if it's because you said it's not what we do, but it's like it's both. It's who I am and what I do. And it influences my work and my relationship with friends and my partner and my kids. And it's owning your truth, but holding it lightly because it can evolve over time, right? So I'm not about just being in a fixed state as far as who I am. I think the beauty of life is that we can grow and develop over time.
Life is so dynamic. I say to people, it's more like an ocean than a swimming pool. So it's so much better to learn how to surf than just keep on swimming. And so I
Like
love
your water metaphors, because I'm like I don't want to get in the water. So
funny.
let's do something. You're like swimming. Let me fly. I'm gonna fly.
Sure, I think it just speaks to me as a person. I love open waters. I've never
Terrifying.
yeah, I never think about air analogies, but yeah, you can fly.
Yeah, I'm gonna fly.
Oh,
Let's
like
do that.
as long as you're moving in a dynamic,
Agreed.
way, aerodynamic, water dynamic, was it hydrodynamic? I had no science teachers, Petra. Don't quote me on that last one.
Love it. But I agree with you. It's movement. And if the pandemic has done anything for workplaces, it's to accelerate the ability to move forward, to question things, to change. Because if you don't change, businesses are failing left, right, and center for trying to hold on and stay stuck. So we're kind of forced to, in a way.
And it's so interesting because we see so many business trying to revert back to a world that no longer exists.
No, dangerous.
Absolutely, absolutely. But Petra, you kind of alluded to it a moment ago, but it'd be really great to understand more about your background, your upbringing, and what you experience, who you are as a person, because those two things are definitely different, influenced but different.
Yeah.
Shaped the career that you have now, the work that you do now.
Great, thank you. So as you said in the intro, I was born and raised in a notorious cult. But what's interesting is when you use the word cult, people like their mind goes in all different directions, right? And so what's interesting is there were some good times, like when I just switch out the word cult for commune. These days, people kind of perk up and they go, "Ooh, tell me more," right? They're like desperate for belonging and connection and shared purpose and values. And like you said, we want the team to bring us together, but it's a real individualized society. And so it had those components as well. Like I'm one of 5 kids. We grew up in a blended family. My dad's Black, my mom's white. Like I thought my Black brother was my twin till I was about 10 and was schooled differently. You know what I mean? So grew up in India, Brazil, Russia, Kenya, sort of all over the place. And it started with a seed of I guess, a pure mission, which was rather than kind of church systems and places where people believed but didn't do anything and sort of stayed put. The ideal was to go out into the world and take action, right? So some of these themes, as much as I had a middle period of my life where I was like, it's all bad, baby out with bathwater. There's a water analogy. Just throw it out, right? Over time, I realized that some of what I'd been through and the environment that I grew up in gave me some skills for, working with people from all sorts of cultures and backgrounds and all sorts of things. But of course, there was a dark side. And if you grow up in an environment like this is all you know, right? You don't have any scope or space to question things. Like even just what emotions were safe and okay. You could be angry if it was about like them, right? Those people on the outside, and it would fuel your mission forward. But to be angry or frustrated by the context or the belief systems, you would be made an example of, you would be punished or ostracized. Even, we've known parents to ostracize their own kids and sort of kick them out of communities, right? And so long story short, it led me to leading a pretty stark double life. So on the one hand, I was trusted in the environments and was a leader and was helping to run youth programs. And on the other, I was leading a hedonistic life of, alcohol addiction, escapism, just anything to like not sit with myself and sort of numb out. So it spiraled me into severe alcohol addiction once I'd left. Because interestingly, and I wonder if you relate to this,
Go on.
when you're in the context, you're just surviving, right? Maybe you feel some of those physical symptoms. You can't fall apart. You're putting yourself at great risk if you do, right? But it's after the event, you finally leave, you finally make the decision, or it's made for you, right? Through health issues or whatever. For me, I got pregnant and then I was like, oh my goodness, like it's sort of life forced the issue. But that's when I guess the trauma buildup, if we were to put it that way,
Mm.
or finally being in a somewhat safe environment, like everything came out. I don't know. Do you relate to the later
No one
experience?
talks about that enough. The transition from going from survival mode into
Yeah.
peace is terrifying because you live in a world for so long where there are constantly sirens going off.
At least you know the rules.
Yeah, and
They're
then
messed up, but you know them.
you know to expect the sirens, like trauma is going to happen. Like I knew that at some point I was going to get a phone call that my mum was going to be ill again, or I'd have to go visit, or something's happening, or even with my own losing control of my own body. I knew that eventually I was going to lose my ability to walk, see, control my own bladder. Yay! But when you have that transition from survival mode into peace, you're still on alert because you're waiting for the sirens to go off, even if the sirens no longer exist in your world. You're
Yeah,
waiting.
they're in your body. You can
Yeah,
hear them.
and
Yeah.
you're constantly on edge. So no one talks about transition, but that part is so difficult. So I definitely empathize.
And there are layers to this transition. So I went through one layer with the father of my then two kids, and it was outside of that community, but it was in another one.
Mm,
People don't tell you about, like, or I didn't know that everyone has conditioning, systems that influence, or advice, or expectations that they've got to fit into. And so I'd kind of moved into this hyper aware, like, oh, there's these other rules in order to be perceived as normal, right? So this is where my addiction got worse, and eventually depression, anxiety, suicidal thinking, convincing myself my own kids would be better off without me, and then the slow build up over time. But then, just to follow through that thread, when I met my partner now, so I got divorced, met my partner now, 4 years ago now, bless him. Oh my goodness, a new level of safety and love, and a healing space that I'd never, ever, 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 ever experienced to the same extent. And my God, all this stuff started coming up again. This is supposed to be the romantic honeymoon period, right? Huh? Anyway, your question was the thread to my work, and it's deeply personal, as learning to um, recover and invest in myself, and mindset and all this sort of thing. I ended up training as a psychotherapist, and then a coach. And it's when just like you, when something works for you, you're like, oh my God, I need to tell other people. Yeah. And I think it evolved. I worked in youth mental health. I worked with young offenders. I worked with kids, and I think I was drawn to that because it was such a messed up time for my life. So I wanted to support that group, and then it evolved into workplace mental health, and eventually my business. Mostly because I got so sick of working for companies that were perceived as doing it right by telling other people what to do, but not doing it themselves. And I was like, I have led a double life for much too long. Hell no. And it
uh,
sort of led me to do my own thing.
I think it's so important for everyone listening to realize, because some people think or hear the word trauma and think, oh, well, that can't be me because I didn't grow up in a cult, or, I didn't lose my parents or my health. But trauma is trauma. It impacts our body the same, irrespective of what may be the cause of it. So if you've had a huge disruption in your life due to, breakdown of relationship, loss of a loved one, loss of a career, any huge shock to your way of living
Yep.
constitutes trauma. So I think sometimes we think, oh, well, someone else has got it worse than us. For anyone listening, your feelings, your reality is completely valid. And I say that to say, whilst Petra was talking, I was thinking about all the things in my life and the level of parallel, Petra, in what you're talking about in terms of different vices or code switching, and even just, dare I say, even my Caribbean upbringing, the conditioning, and the reason
Yeah.
why. Well, my mom's in a coma, but I need to go and finish my economics degree because that's what's expected of me. Oh, my mum just died. I'm going to start my first investment job 4 days after her funeral because that's what's expected of me. And there's a level of parallel there. And I think what we're hearing is it's a trauma response.
Yeah.
But what I'm also hearing, and another beautiful parallel, is how do you turn the manure into fertilizer And
Oh, do we have to use that language on this podcast?
how do you turn that shit into some great fertilizer, right? Like, how do
That's it.
you increase the properties of that and build a new orchard? Because it truly is an orchard. You've taken it from just helping one category of people to just helping people across the board. You really built an orchard out of everything you've been through. And I think there's so much strength in that. There's so much strength in that that a lot of us can tap into. So thank you for sharing that with us, Petra.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you don't know, now you know. I love sustainable success, right? I absolutely love sustainable
Yes.
success. And I think, even as you said, throughout your journey growing up, although there have been those dark moments, there are also a lot of great moments. And I think that's in life. It's oftentimes two sides of the same coin. And depending on where we are in our healing, in our journey, in our reflection, we can see both sides. And that's similar to success. We often forget sometimes the hard work that goes into success, or maybe the trauma that inspired you to become a burnout expert.
Totally.
You know,
Speaking of no one in particular.
no one at all. I don't know something like that. But also the fact that actually it does take those paradigm shifts, those turning points to set you on another path. So my question to you, Petra, is given that sustainable success is often not, if ever, linear, has there been that sort of pivotal time in your life, an event or something specific? So I know you mentioned earlier becoming a mother, your new relationship and so forth, but just in your general career path, has there been something where it's been a point of pivoting, failure, potentially even burnout that sort of set you on the path where you're like, right, actually, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do it. Anything recent or in the past?
So I think there's been when you're committed to honesty, then there's lots of pivotal moments. But once so alcohol addiction, quitting drinking was a big pivotal moment, because learning to be honest and observe other people's honesty meant that I could no longer, like physically, I could no longer be in certain environments. I remember quitting a job 3 months in because I knew that it would not be good for my mental health. And my husband at the time, so my ex, was like, how can you quit a job without having another thing to go to, And I was like, don't care, like it's not worth it for me, for my kids, for the whole ripple effect. A few other pivotal moments. I feel like I've never been a person to have and I don't think anyone, if they say they do, I'd question if they were speaking the truth, has had like a business plan or a life trajectory that they set out for 5 years, 10 years, and it went that way. I always had a vision of where I wanted to get to, and that was create impact. But I thought I was kind of content doing that one-to-one with teenagers and stuff. And then I got to this place where I got restless. And then it was like, oh, these new opportunities sort of arose. Other pivotal moments when I got divorced, and I know you're talking about workplace ones, but that affected my work because it gave me freedom to take risks. I no longer had to consider someone else in a way, and to think, oh, what's the right plan for us? And remember, when you're in a coercive, controlling environment your entire life, once you leave, you don't just magically not have that capability to defer and to people please and to let other people default to the decisions, right? So I mean, it was some buildup to even get divorced, right? And so that was the very first time I was essentially free, but with great freedom comes great responsibility. And like, this is it. You got a little bit of money in the bank. Your bills and everything are on you now. And then I just took some big risks. I went for a job that I was like, there's no way I'm going to get this. But this has kind of been a thing for me. When I did a counseling qualification and thought, because I didn't know the rules for life, what if I skipped doing a degree and just did a master's? No one's ever going to ask me if I have a degree then, right? Makes sense to me. And then yeah. And so I applied for a master's program thinking there's no way. But most people would go, there's no way, and not do it. I'd be like, there's no way. I'll just do the form, right? Then they invite me to interview and I'd be like, I don't even know I'm going to pay for this. There's no way. But then show up, you know what I mean? Got onto the master's program. And so divorce kind of freed me up to just live life or I should say, to learn to live life on my terms, because it's certainly not linear, like you said.
Absolutely. I can relate so much. I'm really glad you brought up the point, like, because oftentimes feel that work, the professional world, manifests what's happening in our personal life because we don't have
Totally.
KPIs in our personal life. Should I say KPIs, key performance indicators in our personal life in the way that we do in our working life? So I was asking that more to see, without doing a leading question, how much of our personal lives, our lifestyle then has an effect on our career progression and so forth. So thanks for highlighting that. And I think
And
you're
the reverse is true as well, right?
absolutely,
So your key performance indicators say nothing about your fulfillment, your relationships, if you can
without
sleep at night, you know what I mean? So it's like that duality, being able to hold it.
and it is a duality. I think, as I said before, a lot of the things are different sides of the same coin, and it's being able to recognize that. So, in the space of burnout, a lot of people think, oh, it must be the organization, it must be my workload. And yeah, they can be contributing factors. They're often not the sole factors because we've mentioned in this conversation so far purpose. And purpose is so important. It's like, why are we doing this? If there's no purpose, then there's no purpose. I'm not going to make it happen.
Yeah.
And it becomes lifeless and there is no fulfillment. And then, similar to what you're saying, the people please and the conditioning, we end up seeking the external validation over the intrinsic fulfillment, which is what propels us naturally day by day. So, yeah, absolutely agree with that entirely. Mine wasn't a divorce, mine was definitely multiple sclerosis, but it shook me up in such a way that I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I've tried to do everything
Yeah.
the right way, and it's literally
Yeah.
stopped my health.
Yeah, it's so full on, and I think that's, as a therapist, like the amount of people that have come to me with anxiety symptoms, depression, a whole physical health issues like burnout, you know, a whole range of things, and you very quickly can kind of pick away at what the issue is. People are quite simple when it comes down to it. When you see enough of them, you're like, oh, we do have patterns and frameworks, right? And when you are living a life that is not yours, over
Absolutely.
time, your physical and your mental health will be affected. And so
Absolutely.
for me, it's not how do you manage pain? How do you this, that? You know, that's a different person. You know, for me, it's challenging people to rediscover or discover for the first time what they've been killing inside of them. You know what I mean? Who are you? What do you want? And actually taking action to achieve those things.
Absolutely. That for me, that's what it was. I lived in a burnout cycle over 4 years, but being diagnosed with MS was the ultimate burnout, the one that made me hit
Yeah.
that and start to,
Whew.
for the first time ever, dream about what my life could be like. I
Why
wrote
don't you think you listened before?
because I didn't know what my life was supposed to be. I was doing everything for external validation. I didn't actually know who I was and what I wanted to do. So I was just going with what I was told, even down to well-being. Oh, I'm a millennial, so I was meditating. It was 2017. I was predominantly plant-based. What you do, I
This
was
is
someone.
what I loved about your talk. I was like, I'm doing well-being. You were like, you had it all there,
It
right?
all is. Gym sits
Yeah.
a week, sometimes even twice a day, because actually I was suffering from insomnia. And so if I went to the gym in the early hours and again in the evening, I was just using up some of that time, especially because I didn't have the social battery to put the mask on with my friends because I was at rock bottom. And I spent a lot of money because I thought retail therapy was easier. Went £8,500 worth of consumer debt, just,
Woo,
going
woo.
on the next holiday and buying the next thing here, trying to add some level of fulfillment and purpose in my life, but it was empty. It was
Mm.
void. And that's why I didn't listen because I almost died about what's it, 3 years before I even got diagnosed with MS. I had a burnout which had me fighting sepsis in hospital for 7 days. And I didn't know my lesson because even then I was just trying to figure out what I was supposed to do, not who I truly was and what I wanted to do.
And what your body was telling you,
Oh, forget the body.
like
We had
loud and clear.
we had the sirens going on. We couldn't hear the sirens from the body. We just figured out, what other people want me to do or what I and do you know what's funny enough, Petra, to be honest with you? It was my perspective of what I thought other people wanted of me and not
Right.
actually what they wanted of me.
It's not even real.
It
No, it's
wasn't
all made up. I see
incredible.
so many people basing their life, especially at work, on assumptions. Teams are basing behaviors on assumptions. Leadership are basing things on assumptions. Everyone's basing things on assumptions. Nobody's actually pleasing anyone because if you go to a management meeting, they're like, these people are so difficult. And they're bitching about the manager. And you're like, can we just be real with each other, please?
Honestly, the duplicitous nature of
Whew.
organizations, it's funny. I remember when I was studying psychology at A level, there's an approach to schizophrenia called the double bind for theory, where it's like a parent will say to a child that they love them whilst actively doing things that shows they don't love them. And the conflict of the message and the actions, they say schizophrenia is symptomatic of that. And I feel like we experience that a lot within workplaces. They'll say one thing and behave a completely different
Yeah.
way. Very much have a lived experience of that. How dare I show up to my last employers doing a job they hired me to do? How dare I do that, do it so well, they give me bonuses for it, that they then went on a witch hunt and gave a prolonged 17-month campaign of racial discrimination. Irony being, they hired me to be a race advisor and change the culture.
Oh, that's a whole other podcast, man.
Do you know what I
That's
mean?
gonna, yeah.
So when you said earlier about how you left a job after 3 months, I stayed partly to be a thorn in their side to see if they wanted to actually do the right thing, including my own D&I team, if they were going to actually step up to the mantle. But when it did come to a point when I realized my energy was being wasted, I just said to my manager, I'm out. And he said,
Yeah.
oh, you owe us holiday pay. I said, it's a small price to pay for my mental health. I'm gone.
Yeah. You reached your limit.
Yeah, absolutely. The lemon was no longer worth the squeeze, Petra. I was out.
No.
I was out. So yeah, I think it often happens that the assumptions are there. We try and live up to the external validation, and that's often the first thing that happens when people burn out. They lose that sense of agency and autonomy and
Yeah.
vision for their life. More so because they probably never had one to begin with.
Well, that's it. I think they never found it, or
Yeah.
it was an illusion. Like if we give you autonomy in, whatever, pizza Fridays, or go to pick up your kid one day, or I don't know. There's these little gimmicky illusions of autonomy going on, but when it comes down to it, there's very limited autonomy for many people, and that
Mm.
will erode and corrode your confidence, your sense of self, like all the things that you need in order to build the life you want, slowly start eroding until you're so like flat on your back, unable to do anything, that it's the road from there. The road from there to any sense of fulfillment is so much longer and harder than if we just learn to ask ourselves these questions early on. If our parents, if the education system, if even in this well-being space of information overload, if people took a flying second to say, what actually is my body and mind telling me? What do I need? Not what are the 80 things I need to do before work. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
But also, like, what well-being things align with who you are as a person.
And what phase of life you're in.
Absolutely. And it's dynamic, it changes. Last year I went from being in a don't know how to describe it, a David Lloyd, because that's what it was. I went from being a David
Yeah.
for the last like 18 months going, yeah, this is where I need to be. And now this year, my needs, what I want, that level of commitment has all changed. I'm allowing myself to go through the different seasons of being myself. And as I change those dimensions of wellness, all 8 of them naturally morph with the person
Yeah,
now. And it's allowing yourself to have that level of dynamic living. It's so important. So important.
absolutely.
So Petra, given that you are a therapist, what advice would you give to people right now who are experiencing burnout, want to take control of their life and really start to discover what works for them?
I think the first step is creating a little bit of space to reflect. And this doesn't have to be like a long retreat or a holiday or anything like that, but it could simply be, I mean, I used to just write stuff in my notebook, and it wasn't exactly journaling. It was, it was dreams, it was doubts, it was hopes, it was what ifs, all of that. And that was something that worked for me. It could be if you're going to on a commute to work, which some people do part-time these days, don't put headphones in. Like, stop listening to stuff all the time and just be like, how do I feel? Like, am I energized about going to work? Do I feel excited about seeing my colleagues? Am I excited about the projects I'm working on? But also sometimes people need an external bit of support, whether that's a coach or someone I trained as a coach, and interestingly, the level of coaching I got while training was second to none, because it was the first time I was asked the very simple question, what do you want? And it was in that moment and that safe environment that I realized that I'd never been asked that question or asked myself that question. right? And I'm in my late 20s now, right? And so when I thought, my poor ex-husband, but when I thought, what do I want with no limitations? If fear didn't exist, what would you do? If guilt didn't exist, what would you do? I was like, I want to be free. I wanted to, I started the ball rolling for divorce, right? And setting up a different life. So be under no illusion. The reason we numb out on reflection and asking ourselves these questions is because then we might have to take action, and that's bloody scary. And if I could just Netflix and chill for one more night and not have to do anything, let me do that. And so this is why the human condition, right? We wait until we're flat on our back or completely destroyed.
Yeah.
And the idea of staying there is worse than now the work that it would take to move forward.
Absolutely. I can empathize with that entirely. Before I left the investment industry, before I medically retired, aka I left before they could ask me to leave,
Yeah,
I
smart.
used their printers to create my first ever vision board back in 2019.
Mm.
It's still up on my wall in a glass frame till today. And even just this morning, I got an email about something that at the time I thought was inconceivable. But it came to pass 4 years later. And I'm like, okay, wow. And the reason why I created that vision board was because I was at rock bottom. And for the first time ever, like you said, I dared myself to dream, because I could either stay where I'm at or I can decide that we're going up, because there's no other option when you're at rock bottom. You stay where you're at or you can go up. But it shouldn't have to take being at rock bottom to make the changes we need. So my question to you, Petra, for everyone listening, how do you do the work to begin discovering who you are? I know you said making notes in the journals and so forth, but once we cut out that noise or we get fed up of numbing ourselves, like I think a lot of people experienced during national lockdown when there was nothing else you could do but either numb yourself or sit with yourself,
Yeah.
practically start doing the work to discover who you truly are.
So it depends on what phase of life you're in, for sure. But the flip side, the good side, because you said the two sides of the coin, right, of information overload, is that there is free, like, people. I wasn't allowed to go to school as a child. There is free education everywhere. People do not understand what a big
Really
deal
put
this
it in
is.
perspective, like we live everything at our beck and call.
You
Imagine,
can learn anything.
yeah,
Just, you can hop on LinkedIn Learning. You can buy a book if you prefer listening to books. That didn't exist before. You can just listen. You can have someone read a book to you if that's the way that you learn, right? You can learn through going through a course, through connecting with people. Like, the scope is unbelievable. And of course, sometimes that makes people freeze because they're like, it's too much. Where do I start, right? But start with your interests, right? Start with what you're curious about. But one of the 5 ways to well-being is to continue learning. So whatever that looks like for you, it's that curiosity, even if it's like get outside of your friendship circle, right? Or your work colleagues, whatever. Go outside of that, right? Into a different department in work. It's so simple, really.
yeah,
But the world is set up for us to stay within our algorithms, whether they're physical or whether they're virtual, right? And so those small, brave acts, and I talk about practicing bravery because I think that's what the skill is. And for me, that my first practices of bravery were saying, one sentence through tears, in a recovery group. Bravery. Right now, I'm like, I speak on stages. I'm like, really? What? Bravery is deeply personal, right?
yeah,
It's talking to your barista who gives you coffee in the morning and saying, hey, good morning. How's your day? Right? Not a British thing. And it's little things that get us out of our comfort zone over time. And then, like I said, being radically honest, but that could be surrounding yourself with people that aren't just a mirror image of your complaints,
yeah,
right? So we all do it. And I did it when I was like in victim mode of like, I didn't go to school and I grew up in a cult, man. And people would go, that's terrible. And I'd find the people that would go, that's terrible. Of course you're in this place, right? And then it would give me reason to stay, right? But finding those people that will go, are you buying into your own bullshit right now?
yeah,
Those are your true friends, right? So surround yourself with people who will challenge you, who you can challenge. But all of this takes time. It's that wonderful journey idea, right? Or
yeah.
boat ride if we're going to get back on the water.
I think another thing that helped me as well was realizing where my energy was low. So oftentimes I think I'm tired, but actually no, my energy's low because I've been in a certain environment or hanging around a certain person who just isn't for me. And I think our body always tells us, it might take some of us longer than others to listen to when our body is literally screaming at us. But sometimes the indication as well is, how do you feel? So we spoke about purpose before, propelling you. I think sometimes if you find yourself being dragged and kicked there, then it's probably not for you. A few weeks ago, I went to a luncheon hosted by Beyonce's charity, and her dad, Matthew Knowles, incredible businessman, was the keynote speaker. And someone asked him, like, how do you help your children discover what they want to do without forcing them into it? I mean, his daughters are Beyonce and Solange. I mean, how do you
Yeah,
create
yeah, yeah.
challenges in their
Yes.
respective areas? And even though they were talking about raising children, I'm not in that mode of life yet. I think as an entrepreneur, as a professional in general, what he said is quite profound. And it was simply that he never had to chase Beyonce and Solange to attend rehearsals, practices, or get to their classes. They wanted to do it. And I think with us as adults, it's, what do we want to do? There are some things in life that are means to an end, but if we give purpose behind it, i.e., I really enjoy having a roof over my head. Work is a means to an end at this moment. It's a short-term one, not necessarily a profound,
Yeah.
life-changing purpose, but giving purpose to things really helps to move the needle you need in order to get the clarity you desire to make the monumental changes. So listening to your body, am I fighting to make this happen, or do I naturally gravitate towards this, is really helpful.
I'll throw just a little lens on that, because I'm all about listening to your body, and I agree. But
Mhm.
some people don't have the skill to listen to their body. So my little catchphrase is, listen to your body, but sometimes your body lies to you. And what I mean by that is, if you just went with, what does my body want right now? I'd like to eat a tub of ice cream and
Me
just put
too.
some TV on and not do anything ever. That's not actually true anymore, but it could be, right? Or it's like, I want to go to the gym. Like, I want to just hang here for a while, right? So it's this subtle difference of, what does my body need? So I know we've been talking about, what do I want for my life, but what does my body need to enable me to do the work to achieve that thing? And so your body might need to go to the gym or to do a different form of movement that would enable you to stay strong and healthy. Do you see what I mean? So it's just like that little, don't listen to your own bullshit either, which is like, I just need to sleep forever.
It's interesting as well, because I think what we're really saying then is there's a difference between, oftentimes when the sirens are going on, you can't hear what your soul needs. So we rely on the physical as opposed to the energy. So when I
Right.
talk about the difference between being tired and low energy, they're so
Beautiful.
similar that you have to really be in tune with yourself, which is difficult to do when you're in survival mode or adjusting to peace. Hence why you have to start with not being burnt out in order to excel in general, so you can really feel that difference. I'm going to continue with that line of conversation because I'm not yet a mother, but it's definitely one of my dreams, Petra. So I'd like to know from your perspective, how do you, in the words of your book, begin with you as a mother or as a parent? Let's keep it inclusive, as a parent. Because sometimes you don't have time for a break because, life is constantly going. Children have different needs, demands, both intrinsically, extrinsically. But you still need a level of freedom. You need to be able to pour into your own cup to show up as a parent. So how do you navigate that space and create that freedom?
I think we should keep the question to mother,
Okay.
as much as I want to be inclusive, because otherwise we'll have to throw in the patriarchy, and that's a whole thing as well.
Okay.
When
Mother.
it comes,
How do we
yeah,
help mothers, Petra?
yes, yes. Of course, these principles apply to everyone, but I think there's phases in your life when I actually challenge the oxygen mask metaphor, and I think it was invented by men, to be translated into a well-being place, because if you're a mother, there's no fucking way, I don't care what you watch or who tells you, right, that you are going to put your oxygen mask on first if your child is dying. You're
Yeah,
just not.
that makes so much sense. I'm not even in that stage of my life yet, and I'm already there. Yeah.
What you're going to hope for is to put yours on at the same time as that kid.
Mm.
Like, why isn't nobody saying this and acting like it's this perfect linear, like, I'm so zen, and now I'm going to deal with this toddler tantrum from this zen place. No, that person has not had 82 tantrums in the space of 48 hours. You know what I mean? It's just not. So there's phases of your life, like when I was parenting 2 young kids. I was working full time, and I was doing my master's degree at night at Birkbeck. And my partner, bless him, I hope he doesn't listen, was just going to work. Anyway, um, that was a phase in my life when the best I could do was get some solid hours of sleep, maybe 5 or 6,
Yeah.
was to do a 3-minute, I used to do a 3-minute guided meditation on my headphones, often while walking or doing something to help me emotionally regulate,
Yeah.
right? I might be watching a 5-minute YouTube clip of somebody that I admire, right? In order for me to make up for lost time and get to ground zero where everyone else started, right? There was no option for this oxygen business.
That makes so much sense as you're saying it. Yeah, because if I put my child's on and I survive, but somehow my child doesn't, that's inconceivable. We're not gonna allow it to happen. But also it needs to be at the same time because God forbid my child survives without me. I need to make sure that they're okay. That
Of
makes perfect
course,
sense.
of
So what I'm
course.
hearing is
But
incorporating it into your lifestyle.
incorporating it in small wins. I mean, I have a friend, I respect her so much. She has a young child, and I've never known anyone to negotiate well-being time so well. She's like, yeah, I went out and did this, and I went out and did that. And I'm like, how, what? Times are changing, apparently. And she's less of a people pleaser, which is what I was raised on, right? Was people pleasing. And if I could just be perfect on the outside, and I don't mean perfectionism, like everything had to be perfect, but just normal, like
Yeah.
what I perceived was normal. Um, but then what, circling back to what we said at the beginning, so that doesn't mean that stress doesn't stack up over time, and there will be phases of your life that you've got to put that recovery in place. That's
Mhm.
not sustainable long term,
Absolutely
but
not.
it's sometimes the reality to get to a goal. But then what? So it's like check your habits at that point and survival mechanisms.
And I guess it goes back to what you're saying about the different phases as well, because it's funny hearing you talking about having now 2 young adult children. I'm sure your style of parenting and it's very different from what they would have needed or the parent
Totally.
relationship. Because being almost 30 with my dad now, there's 30 years between us, so he's going to be 60 this summer. I'm going to be 30, and our relationship has transformed so much over the last few years from him parenting a teenager, a young adult, to now parenting a young but a little bit older adult. I feel like I'm still a young adult.
Yeah, you are. Of course you are.
I'm claiming it. So thank you very much for sharing that. But that makes so much sense. Yeah, that whole oxygen mask thing. No, doesn't work, does it?
But this is radical honesty. Like people can't leave this podcast quoting us and going, well, fuck the oxygen mask. That's not it. That's
Yeah.
not it. It's know what choices you are making, and you will deal with the outcome, whatever that looks like for you.
Oh my gosh, I think accountability is so liberating. A lot of people
Yeah.
shirk from it, but anyone is that people's inability to take accountability makes them a liability. And I think accountability shows up in so many different ways, and you have to show up for yourself and show up for the people around you. And as you said, be prepared for the outcomes, the consequences of decisions that you make. And it's the perfect way to retain your personal power. So many people give away their personal powers by simply not taking accountability.
Yeah. And this is a work in progress. I feel like it's interesting, the different compartments of your life, right? Like in work, I think I've hacked boundaries. I'm very straightforward. I'm like, and then in parenting, I've got a real kind of, it's funny, all my kids' friends come to our house. They're like, yay, let's go to their house. Because they know that we're going to be like welcoming, and, we don't frown at things. We talk about them, all of that. But then in my relationship, I have to check and balance my nervous system, my accountability, my people pleasing, my asking for what I need. Like it's like this microcosm of, oh my God, actually, I still have things to learn.
Yeah, I get that entirely. And I think it's like that survivor, isn't it? The survivor, not guilt per se, but maybe for lack
Mm,
of a better term, it's coming out of that trauma and readjusting and ensuring that you are showing up for yourself and not just accommodating, or are you speaking up a certain for yourself and so forth. So I think this is a perfect segue because oftentimes what we also didn't talk about with boundaries is that quite frankly it pisses other people off if they're not really for us. So I love boundaries because I think it's the perfect way to prune the tree that is your life. because those who are really for you will love the fact you have boundaries. They'll adjust, they'll acclimatize to change, but they're happy for you. Whereas those who are more social vampires, parasites, those are the ones who tend to get particularly peeved by you setting boundaries. So, how do we deal with those people in our lives who don't actually want us to change, who might be, whether consciously or subconsciously, manipulating our new current realities because they want to hold on to the old us who didn't have boundaries, who weren't empowered? How do we do that?
I think there's different layers of support networks and friendships. There's certain people from back in the day or different situations where they're just light touch, friends that you'll see every once in a while, but they're less affected by maybe some of the decisions that I make. I surround myself with people who get it now, like you do mostly. But boundaries, I think the gap that many people, what people fail to do is communicate their boundaries effectively. So
Yeah.
they create them, they read a book, they write a list, they make a map. I don't know what they do, but they're like rock solid boundaries, or they've discovered it. And then they don't tell anyone. They try and do these different things, and people are like, "What? They're not even mean people. They're just like, huh? Like, what's happening?" Like a simple one, pandemic times, I'm working from home. My kids at 5 or 6, they're like, what are we having for dinner? Like, just thinking, what are we going to cook? And by that time, I'm so sick of my house, I simply have to get out, right? And so I just like leave, slam the door. I'd be like, this is my boundary. I need a walk before I can do dinner. Texting, like 82 texts, they're like, what's dinner? I'm like, oh, they're not backing up my boundaries, right? And so like a simple like, hey guys, when I finish work, I'm going to take 30 minutes to walk and then I'll come back and do dinner. It's like a simple example, but it's like, this is what happens both in our personal lives and in the workplace. We want to schedule in some gym time. We want to schedule in whatever it is, right? Some focus time where we're not on emails, right? We don't tell anyone we're doing that. Yesterday you answered emails at that time and now you've just MIA. So then all the assumptions start flying, right? So it's quite simple, but scary for some people because they're like, oh, will they judge me? Will they reject me? But it's like, hey, I'm trying out this boundary in order to invest in myself. And you can use different language, whatever. And I'm not saying it'll be foolproof and nobody will ever have a reaction or say anything, but my God, it helps.
It definitely helps. I tell people it's the 5 C's of boundaries. First of all, you have to create your boundaries. Then you have to effectively communicate your boundaries, not just say them to people, but communicate them in a way that the other person can receive it.
Yeah.
Then you have to be consistent with your boundaries because other people have to adjust the same way that you're adjusting to the boundaries that you now have in your life. Other people have to adjust those boundaries too. And then be compassionate because for some people it's going to be difficult for them to adjust. Other people are just going to be assholes about it. But for those who truly care for you, there's going to be a level of difficulty. And then lastly, commit to your boundaries because it's so easy to revert back to what you've always known. So create them, communicate them, be consistent, be compassionate in enforcing them, and truly commit to them because it's so easy to revert back.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. And I mean, there's like, also, I'd say experiment with the smaller boundaries first. If you're like a newbie, like what is a boundary? Like get some small wins, under your belt and then build from there. Because otherwise, I think we go like, 1,000 miles an hour, all the boundaries, and then realize we have no friends anymore. So it's like, what's the journey for you?
I think it's interesting. You still went workplace once because I say to people all the time, your calendar. The best way to enforce your boundaries is your calendar. Block out the first 30 minutes of your day potentially where you're just organizing what you're doing in the day, maybe emails, no meetings. I personally don't think we should be having meetings before 10 a.m. I don't know who needs to talk to me before 10 a.m.
You're not a morning person, are you?
I am, but I like them to be mine. I'm up from 4 a.m. Like sometimes half
Fair
3.
enough.
The first 5 hours of the day are mine.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I get it. It's like when you have the maximum energy, what are you going to focus your time and attention on? That makes sense.
Absolutely. But one time, I used to be precious about my lunch times as well, as I should, because someone who was an insomniac who can now nap, I take all my siestas when I can.
Oh,
Oh, I love it.
I'm not very good at that.
Oh, sweet relief, love it. But I blocked out my lunch times in my old job, and I had someone try and book in a non-urgent meeting in my calendar, despite they'd already seen it's blocked out. So I politely wrote back, really would love to have this meeting with you. Looking forward to discussing this. However, it's my lunch break. Can we please change it to Monday at 3 o'clock when we're all free?
Mhm.
Went back to my manager and gave a tone complaint
Oh,
simply because I
uh,
dared.
oh.
I
So it's
dared.
just so they thought just the pushback in general became an issue, and they couldn't come to you about that, but had to go to your mat. Oh, yeah, that's like children playground stuff. Yeah.
Part of radical honesty, people out there are going to be so, and I think it's a case of envy that they can't enforce their own boundaries as well. So a lot of the pushback you're going to get from people is their own projections of insecurities. 'Cause I don't think people are inherently horrible, but I think projection of insecurities can lead to very unkind behavior. So
It's reaction to change as well. So
yeah,
like change triggers us, many of us, and brings up uncertainties, whether it's insecurity or something else. And so often the immediate reaction from a survival perspective is push back. Why are you messing with my reality? You know?
absolutely. So that being said, Petra, how can the HR managers listening help to increase a sense of psychological safety within their organization so people don't push back against healthy behaviors like boundaries?
So psychological safety is a big one, and it can't just be HR's remit. Of course, it's got to be senior leaders, and Brené Brown, Dr. Brené Brown says, trust is built in those small building blocks every day.
Mm,
Often we think psychological safety is the big workshop and the away day, and like here's the framework for psychological safety. Great, it's good to have an understanding of not only how you build it, but also what erodes it, because
mm,
I've seen companies do really good work and then with one move,
yeah.
fire 10% of their workforce on Zoom. You haven't just stayed static, you have gone minus 30 in eroding psychological safety, right? So it goes both ways. Um, First of all, it's taking responsibility for yourself. So I've been in companies where this department feels psychologically safe, this one doesn't, right? And so it isn't just a one size fits all system of psychological safety. You can have trust with two people. So that manager and that individual can build trust. And that's a ripple effect that can go outwards, right? So I would usually ask HR, because I always think lead by example, start with you, begin with you, title of the book, right? Is how psychologically safe is the HR department? Start where you are, right? And then challenge your exec team about that question. And that could be as simple as, throwing up a slide or a question, and there's lots out there to ask people to discuss, right? But it's that feeling, right? Where
Mm,
you go into a workplace and you're like, you're immediately tense, right? And you're looking over your shoulder a bit and you're thinking, am I going to say the wrong thing? What
yeah.
we know is a lack of psychological safety is bad for business, right? Every bit of evidence suggests that if we're not safe, we don't say when we're messing up, when we need a team support, when we need backup. And so rather than prevent things from getting bigger, we're like, let's not talk, and it gets bigger, bigger until, like we talked about, our bodies and our minds, right? Life makes the decision for us.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, so take those small steps. And people think I'm waiting for the strategy or the big thing. Great, those are good, but small things can happen every day just with you.
I completely, completely agree with that. I'm a huge believer that if you don't have an inclusive and psychologically safe culture, by default, you have a hostile environment, and no one thrives in hostility at all.
Some people think that they do. It's hilarious how many leaders are out there that are like, the more hostile it is, the more productive they'll be. This is the way it always was. I mean, the Wild West out there in a way.
As a former stress addict, I can kind of align with that, but it wasn't the hostility, it was the high pressure. I'm like, yeah, I need this in order to excel, which is partly true.
Mm,
It's partly true, which is why I'm a former stress addict. I do like a tight deadline, but I
mm.
don't need a hostile environment whatsoever.
No, it's bad for our health, as we keep saying. Yeah.
Speaking of health, Petra, I always get asked, do I practice what I preach? And I can safely say that I do. I truly have created a burnout-free lifestyle, which enables me to be agile and tenacious in my approach to life. And when things do feel shitty, I can get myself back on course. What is, actually, I've had the pleasure of asking you this before, but I'd love to ask you again.
I'm
What
sure I'll
is,
have a new answer.
I love it. Let's go. What is your non-negotiable, Petra, when it comes to protecting your own well-being?
It's actually exercise. And I know I talked about the people around me. I mean, I was in a crowd of people. Like, you gotta work the room, right?
Full of loved people and people who loved you. It was the right answer, but
It was the right answer. So much love. But no, I need the right people in my life, and there's energy drains for sure. But for me, movement is the single best way to shake out the stress that can still stack up and build over time. So movement, radical honesty. Like, I recently changed the whole trajectory of my business because it didn't feel right and I wasn't enjoying the journey anymore. And so that's information. And if you stay quiet for too long, either your business goes under anyway, right? Because it wasn't the thing that but it's hard work to move a ship and to change direction. Movement, radical honesty. Yeah, exactly. But I don't want to act like I've got it all figured out. Like, I live with PTSD. Sometimes my nervous system means that work feels really safe. And so I will lean into that a little bit more. I've got a nice check and balance with my partner who will notice it and isn't like that at all. But there will be times, of course, where I'll be physically exhausted and be like, oh, I did it again, where I just pushed and pushed because of a feeling inside me rather than just I set up my own life.
Yeah.
I'm the one who generates work, right? But it's that noticing, getting back on track, and having the backup to do so.
I love that. And I think it's a good time to highlight the difference between being run down and being burnt out.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes, especially myself, being like a burnout specialist, burnout expert, people are like, do you burn out? And I can safely say I don't, but I do get run down. Oh my gosh, I will lose my voice, or I get exhausted, or like you said, there is that safety in work. And so if I do get inspired by an idea, I can just go full pelt into
It's fun work though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's sort of form of stress that it comes out. But it's a difference between being run down and being burnt out. And I think you're so absolutely correct. A lot of the times people don't realize that you can have stress relief and stress reduction. And so stress reduction is paramount for burnout prevention. You have to reduce the level of stressors you're experiencing. And some of them are people in our lives, or it could be the way we're living our lives. They just need to change. But that stress relief is, how do we decrease the level of stress hormones in our body that do naturally arise from different things? And as you said, movement is great in helping to shift the cortisol and the adrenaline in the body to help you feel better. So for me, it generally is gym. Haven't been in the last week, on reflection.
But it can just be walking out in the sunshine. It can, I've got a friend who lives close by and we'll go, let's go for a walk at the end of the day. Or there's like a lot of ways to show up. And you can, I'll do a couple yoga stretches while I've got TV on in the evening, right? So I'm like, let me move my body a bit, even though I'm watching something, So
and reintroducing dancing into my life, which I think definitely, oh my gosh, I forgot how much I needed it. And I've done a variety of different dances in my life and time. But as you said, it's the movement, and then sound has its own physical vibrations element to it. And it's emoting. It's literally energy in motion. It's the emoting of it all, which is so underrated, but so needed.
So profound in our very sedentary lifestyle. And even this trauma business, where it's like, talk to a therapist about trauma, sitting down, talking. You're like, no, like every bit of evidence is telling us that movement and somatic therapies are more useful. And kind of renegotiating how we see trauma, I think, is an important thing for society to think about as well.
I agree. I think as well, even though I do recommend therapy to people, I think for people who don't want to have problems, not just people who may have problems, I think there does get to a time where, especially if you build a relationship too long with a therapist, they can start validating your bullshit. Or
you get them to
saying over and over.
Get them to. Yeah, I think it's really useful to go to a therapist for one stage of your life to own your story. to
Mhm.
tell it to a witness, to talk about the stuff from beginning to end and help frame your patterns and how this has made you who you are, and then
Absolutely.
let it go.
Absolutely.
Like, I think, yeah,
Like if you're at point B, therapy really helps to you understand how you went from point A to point B, but therapy is not for point B to C. It's, in my personal opinion, I think it's time that we, heal and move forward, knowing who we are. So as you said, when the PTSD, which is very real, I myself no longer suffer from anxiety, an anxiety disorder, but I still get heightened anxiety and I'll easily jump or be sensitive to certain
mm,
environments. It's now knowing that about myself, I can navigate and take back my personal power to make sure that
adjust.
I live in a way, yeah, that is actually beneficial. So, Petra, I am so grateful we've had this conversation, but I do have a final question for you today. I think oftentimes when we hear about the word gratitude, it gets downplayed for being this really fluffy thing. But I'm a firm believer that gratitude helps to change our perception, because if we can change how we experience something, we can change our reality. And being able to change your reality is an incredible superpower no matter what life throws at you. So, what is one thing, one thing from your personal life and one thing from your professional life? So, I want two things from either worlds.
So I feel very grateful. And like, I feel grateful that I deal with normal life problems. When you
I
come back from a different background, you're like, oh, yeah, I got this. I got a parking ticket.
I get that
Cool.
so much about
I'm like, this is what normal people do. Cool, I can deal. Um, I'm grateful that I do every day. I do something I enjoy, and
yeah.
and that's I've worked hard for that, and I'm grateful for that. And I'll own something because of what you said. Gratitude enables all this wonderful stuff, right? So I'll be true talk. I told you before we went on that I'm moving house.
Yeah.
I'm moving 45 minutes away from where I am. My 17-year-old daughter currently hates me for this move. So what I'm going to own on this podcast is I'm so grateful for my beautiful, hilarious, wonderful daughter.
I love
Um, and for the person she is and the person she's made me. And I know this is going to make us stronger as well.
Absolutely. And it will. It will. Life changes often do. Petra, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to me today. I'd like to say that, if you are someone who wants to take ownership of your mental health and thrive both at work and life, please check out Petra's website. Please also buy her book, Begin With You. It is the perfect place to start. We completely endorse the message. Petra, is there anything you would love to say before we go today?
Practice bravery. It's your first step. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.